Well, hello, my name is Christopher Scott and I'm a small groups pastor of a local church. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about how you can use the Warren Wiersbe Bible Study Guide to study the book of 2 Corinthians using the Bible Study Guide and the commentary that comes with it. And these titles are these two books are titled Be Encouraged, God Can Turn Your Trials into Triumph, right? God can turn your trials into triumphs. So let's talk about 2 Corinthians. And how you facilitate a small group and do a study through the book of 2 Corinthians. So in this video, I'm going to cover 4 topics or 4 areas. I'm going to talk to you about how you want to prepare for your small group, right? What do you want to do as facilitator to get ready and prepared to facilitate a discussion through the book of 2 Corinthians? Second, I'm going to talk to you about how to format your small group, okay? What are the specific elements you want to have in your small group? Number 3, I'm going to talk about how the Warren Wiersbe Bible Study Guide is laid out. So I'm going to talk about the number of lessons and then how each lesson is laid out in the guide for you to use and follow. And then lastly, I'm going to give you a brief 5-minute introduction to the book of 2 Corinthians, okay? So let's get started. First, how do you prepare for your small group, right? How do you prepare to facilitate a discussion through the book of 2 Corinthians? And it's good to remember, the main thing that your group is going to be discussing is the Bible, the book of 2 Corinthians. And the tool you're going to use to help you lead that discussion is a Bible study guide, okay? So you're not studying the Bible study guide, you're studying God's Word, but using the Bible study guide to help you as facilitator facilitate a discussion, if that makes sense, okay? So how do you prepare? First thing you want to do is we want to pray for your group members and what they're going to study, right? Pray for them that God would work in their hearts, soften their hearts, and help them learn and grow from studying His Word. That's the first thing you want to do is pray. Number 2, you want to take some time and read through the passage a few times roughly, right? So you're in 2 Corinthians Bible Study Guide. Let's say lesson 6 is titled Misunderstandings, 2 Corinthians chapter 10. So what you want to do is read 2 Corinthians chapter 10 a few times, just quickly. Just read it fast, maybe underline a few things that interest you, maybe highlight a few things that you want to focus on in the study, but just read it quickly, get a feel for what's in there. That's the second thing you want to do is read the passage for that lesson a few times. Third, you want to take some time and work your way through the discussions in the Bible study guide on your own. Jot down a few thoughts on each question. You don't have to be long journal entries and proper grammar. Just jot down a few thoughts, a few things that you're thinking and feeling about the text. Number 4, you want to read the commentary that comes along with the Bible study guide. Right? One of the reasons I really like the Warren Wiersbe Bible study guides is they come with these commentaries also written by Warren Wiersbe that helps the facilitator have a good background of the passage, know about some correct interpretations of the passage, get some ideas for applications, and some good, he gives some good theology and things in here that you might want to know as a facilitator and use to facilitate a good group. So that's the fourth thing you want to do is to read the commentary. And then lastly, 5th, you want to go back through your questions after reading the commentary and see, is there anything you'd like to add or change to your answers to those questions based on what you read? Okay, so that's the 5 things you want to do to prepare to facilitate a small group. Pray for your people, read the passage a few times to get a feel for it, answer the questions in the Bible study guide, read the commentary, and then go back through your questions and see if you want to change or add anything to your questions. 5 basic things you can do, okay? So, how do you format the small group? Okay, at our church we have 3 main elements that every small group should do each week in order, and then 2 additional elements they can mix up and change, okay? So the 3 elements are the unifying question, read the passage, and then work through the questions, okay? So let's talk about the unifying question. The unifying question is something you want to do at your group where you ask the group, what did you all take away from the message at church over the weekend, right? What did you learn? What did you take away from? What stood out to you? And we do that for a few reasons. We ask the unifying question for a few reasons. We want to ask the unifying question, number 1, because we never want a small group to replace people going to church on the weekend, right? We want people to be at church on the weekend as well as in a small group with other believers, right? So we never want a small group to replace people attending church. 2, if your group meets on a Wednesday, a lot of times people have forgot what they learned or were supposed to be applying from church. It was on Sunday, okay? So we ask the unifying question to remind people what they're supposed to be applying. And number 3, we ask the unifying question because we want people to apply what they're learning. We want people to be able to share a little bit what they're learning and implement it and things like that. So we do it to reinforce what they're supposed to be learning, okay? So that's the unifying question you want to do first. Second, you want to have someone in the group read the passage, right? So as I looked at, lesson number 6 was 2 Corinthians chapter 10, right? So if your group is new, if it's a new small group, you as a facilitator need to read the passage for the first several weeks until you get to know who's in your group, who likes to read, who doesn't like to read. The thing you never ever want to do is call on people to read if you don't know if they like to read or if they're a good reader. Because some people are not good readers and won't read out loud. Some people are good readers, but they still don't want to read for other people to hear, right? So you as a facilitator need to take that on yourself to read the passage until you get a feel for your group and who is a good reader. Or some people will pull out their phone and have their phone read it to them. That's an okay way too, okay? So start with unifying question. Have the passage read aloud so everyone can hear it, and then work your way through the questions in the discussion guide. Take your time working through them, but also keep people on track and staying focused on what the questions are, okay? So there's 2 additional elements to your small group. Those are the 3 main things you want to do in each small group. The unifying question, read the passage, and work through the questions, okay? There's 2 additional things you can do, is you can have snacks and do prayer time, right? You can do that at the beginning or the end, whatever might work for you. But those 3 elements you want to keep in the same order each time your group meets, okay? So we've talked about how to prepare for your group, how to format your group. Now I want to talk to you about how to facilitate a discussion through the Warren Wiersbe Bible Study Guides, okay? So how do you facilitate a discussion through the Warren Wiersbe Bible Study Guides? So each lesson, most of the Wiersbe Bible Study Guides have 8 lessons, right? So this one on 2 Corinthians has 8 lessons and then a 9th bonus lesson, okay? So if your group is maybe 5 people or less, you probably can do 1 lesson a week, right? There's usually 14 or 15 questions per lesson, and you can probably get through that, honestly. But if your group has 6 or more people, you're going to need to probably space out the lessons, maybe do 2 weeks per lesson. This is what I encourage you to do. If you need more time than 1 week per lesson, you can divide it up. Say, tell your group, this week we're going to answer and talk about the odd questions, right? Questions 1, 3, 5, ... Next week, we're going to talk about the even questions, 2, 4, 6, 8, ... right? That's one way to divide up your lessons and have a good balanced study. Another way to do 2 weeks per lesson is to do just the first 7 questions, week 1, and then questions 8 through 15, week 2, right? That's another option that you can go about it. The most important thing you're going to want to do here, though, is you need to communicate with your group each week what lesson you're in and what questions they need to come ready to, okay? Let's say you got a group of maybe 15 people or more, and it takes a lot longer to get through the material. That's okay too. You might need 3 weeks per lesson, right? And there's a few different ways you can do that. One way is, I think a great way is you just say we're going to do questions 1 through 5 this week. Next week we're going to do questions 6 through 10, and the week after that we're going to do questions 11 through 15. Take your time, work through it. As a facilitator, you need to provide people a little bit of a summary of what was covered in the weeks prior, if you're going to do that, right? To give the people a little catch-up and reminder, but that's something that you can do as a small group, okay? So, and I suggest that you take your time, keep them on topic, but don't rush them through the material, okay? So, and if you're going to space out the lessons like that, make sure you communicate to your group each week what lesson you're in and what questions need to be answered. You as facilitator don't even have to do this. Find someone in your group that's a good administrator, that's organized, and that might like to have that be their job, that each week they're going to message everybody in the group, 5 days in advance, what lesson your group is in and what questions your group is going to answer. That's just an idea, okay? So that's how many weeks you want to spend per lesson there. There's a couple different options. How do I work through the different sections within the Warren Wiersbe study guide, right? So I mentioned to you that there's 9 lessons, 8 or 9 lessons in the Warren Wiersbe Bible study guide, but then each lesson has 5 different sections, okay? Each lesson has 5 different sections, okay? 5 different sections. The first section is the getting started section, okay? The getting started section. That is 2 questions that just gets people into the text, talking about it, interacting with it, making some basic observations. That's the getting started section, questions 1 and 2. The second section is the going deeper section, and that's going to be the bulk of your study. That's usually questions 3 through 10, And that's where people are going to spend most of their time in the text, wrestling with it, working through it, talking about it. Wiersbe's going to have some excerpts from his commentary in here. He's going to take you to other parts of the Bible to read it and understand. And so that's, if your group's going to get bogged down, it's going to be in the going deeper section. So if you need to, divide up the lesson over multiple weeks, like I said, or skip some questions if you feel like they're not really that helpful. Go for it and do that, okay? Then the next question is the looking inward section. The next section is the looking inward section. Usually that's questions 11 and 12 and 13, right? 11, 12, and 13. Let me double check on this one because sometimes he changes it. 11, 12, and 13 is the looking inward section. And those are 3 questions where Wiersbe's going to have people in your group start to internalize and personalize what they're learning, right? So we've studied this, but how do I interact with that? How have I understood this in the past? How have I applied this in the past? He's going to start bringing it home to the person that is in the study. Then the 4th section is the going forward section. It's one question, question number 14, and it's going to ask someone to go back through the passage, maybe pick one verse that really stands out to them, for them to memorize or meditate, and then pick an application that they might want to do that week in their life, right? So that's really going to drive it home. Question number 14. How are you going to apply what you've just learned through the previous 13 questions? Okay, and then question 15, that's the 5th section. That's the seeking help question. It's basically just ask people to write out a prayer to the Holy Spirit, asking Him to help them apply what they are learning, okay? So that's the different sections. Hope that makes sense. And as you go through the Wiersbe study guides a few times, you'll start to get the feel for it. It'll start to make sense. Your people might struggle with it a little bit at first, but over time they'll get the feel for it and stick it out, okay? So, do you have any other tips for facilitating a discussion using the Bible study guide, right? Here's a few tips for you to use to facilitate the Bible study guide, okay? Facilitate. Don't preach or teach. It's good to remember with this Bible study guide, your job is to facilitate a discussion of the Bible. You don't preach, you don't teach, right? You really should never be talking more than 25% of the time in your small group, okay? Application is more important than completion, okay? Our goal is to get people into God's Word, talking about it, growing, encouraging one another, holding each other accountable, and focusing on Jesus, not to just simply complete a Bible lesson every single week, right, and check it off. No, application is more important than completion. So if you need to spread your group out over a couple weeks, if it takes 2 or 3 weeks to finish one lesson, that's okay. Take your time, work your way through it. There's only 8 lessons in each guide, so if you take 2 weeks per lesson, that's 16 lessons. That's not a whole lot. There's some Bible study guides out there that are like 24 lessons. So then all of a sudden, if you're taking 2 weeks per lesson, now it's 48. Man, that's a whole year, okay? One of the reasons I like these guides is that there's 8, so you can easily stretch them out if needed, okay? You want to communicate with your group each week, okay? That's something I mentioned earlier. Either you as facilitator or even better, delegate someone else in your group to communicate to the group each week about what lesson you're in and what questions the group is going to cover. Most importantly, probably as a facilitator, never ever skip the looking inward or going forward sections, okay? Those are the most important 4 questions of the entire lesson, and you don't want to skip those because that's where people get to talk about how they're applying what they're learning, okay? So, lastly, what do you do maybe if someone shows up to your group? At our church, usually we ask for a $10 fee to cover the cost of the book, right? So if people come, they get $10, they get a Bible study guide, they show up 2 weeks later, oh, I forgot my book. So loan them a guide for them to use during the group, but then make sure you get it back at the end of the group, okay? So that's something you want to do. And what our church likes to do, ask for $10 to cover the fee of the Bible study guide. If someone wants to do the Bible study guide and read through it on their own and study on their own, if they also want to read the commentary, additionally, we just give them the commentary for free. If they're going to invest their own time in their faith and getting to know the Bible, the church is going to invest in them in that way by providing a free commentary. So that's how you facilitate your small group. That's the most, the longest part of this video, but it's the most difficult part of leading a group. Is actually facilitating the group, not selecting a study and things like that. So let me give you a brief introduction to the book of 2 Corinthians, okay? A brief introduction to the book of 2 Corinthians. I've done an introduction to 1 Corinthians before, so that'll pop up there if you want to watch 1 Corinthians, but here's 2 Corinthians, right? So I'm going to talk to you about 6 things for your introduction to the book of 2 Corinthians. I'm going to talk to you about the author, the audience, the date the book was written, the outline of the book, a key verse, and a key theme of the book. 6 things, okay? So the author is the Apostle Paul. Most people know that. There's 27 books in the New Testament in our Bible. So there's 27 books in the New Testament. Paul wrote 13 of those books, and 2 Corinthians is one of those 13 books, okay? The audience that Paul was writing to is kind of unique, right? Because it's the believers in Corinth that had a strong pride in themselves and had a lot of pride in their spiritual gifts and what they did, right? These were pretty proud people that he's writing to. Paul had been there in Corinth in AD 50 to start the church, and he stayed there for about 18 months, starting in 50 AD is when Paul went to Corinth. He was there a year and a half to plant the church and get the church going. And you can read about that in Acts chapter 18, verses 1 through 17, okay? And Paul, interestingly, wrote 4 different letters to the believers in Corinth. Okay, he wrote a total of 4 letters to the believers in Corinth. We only have 2 letters that still exist today, and those are the 2 letters that made it in our Bible, right? But he wrote 4 letters. We know from 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9, that Paul had already written a letter to the believers in Corinth when he wrote 1 Corinthians, our book 1 Corinthians, right? So in 1 Corinthians 5:9, he references a previous letter that he had already written. Okay, so that's the first letter he wrote, was that previous letter. Then the second letter he wrote was 1 Corinthians. The third letter he wrote was a sharp letter, a very pointed and direct, sharp letter that you can read about in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 through 12. And that sharp letter was carried by Titus to the believers in Corinth. And then the fourth letter he wrote is the book of 2 Corinthians, right? So 2 Corinthians is the fourth of 4 letters that Paul wrote to the believers in Corinth. The letter was likely written in about 57 AD. So I mentioned that he was there in 50 AD, stayed there a year and a half, and then he wrote 2 Corinthians in 57 AD. I'm sorry, in 57 AD he wrote 2 Corinthians. He wrote it about 7 months after 1 Corinthians. So it wasn't very long. Half a year later he wrote 2 Corinthians after 1 Corinthians, okay? So, and in this letter, he seems to want to express his relief that Titus, I mentioned Titus brought that third letter to the believers in Corinth. You might have to watch this part a couple times to get the letters down. It's a little confusing. But when Paul wrote his third letter to the believers in Corinth that that Titus brought, that was the sharp letter, the book of 2 Corinthians is the fourth letter, and he seems to express relief that that third letter had caused a positive reaction of the people, right? That they had changed their attitude toward Paul, okay? So the date that he wrote this letter is in AD 57, I mentioned, right? So to give you a little historical background, AD 57 is when Paul wrote the 2 Corinthians letter. Jesus likely died, was buried, resurrected, and ascended to heaven probably in 33 to 36 AD, anywhere from 30 to 36 AD. So 2 Corinthians was written in 57 AD. And then the last letter of the New Testament was written in 95 AD. That was the book of Revelation by John. The first letters of the New Testament that were written likely were Galatians and James in 49 and 50 AD, right? So we're pretty early on in the writing of the New Testament. Most of the Gospels probably were written in the 60s. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written in the 60s AD. And then John was written in 90 AD. So you get a feel that 2 Corinthians probably was written before any of the Gospels were even written. So that's interesting to know. Warren Wiersbe in his commentary, Be Encouraged, provides a great outline of 2 Corinthians. He pretty much divides the book into 3 sections, right? Paul explains his ministry in the first 7 chapters. He explains his ministry. Secondly, he encourages their generosity in chapters 8 and 9. And then third, he enforces his authority in chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. That's an outline. Paul explains his ministry, he encourages the believer's generosity, and then he enforces his authority. A key verse that Warren Wiersbe gives for 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1 is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1 and 6. Let's see how fast I can find 1 Corinthians here. This is real time, not practiced or prepared. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1 and 6. Paul writes, Therefore, since God in his mercy has given us this new way, we never give up. Okay, that's chapter 4, verse 1. And then verse 6 of chapter 4. For God, who said, "Let there be light and darkness," has made this light shine in our hearts so that we could know the glory of God that is seen in the face of Christ, right? So that's the kind of the key verses that go along with the key theme of 2 Corinthians of God's encouragement, that God is encouraging us, right? So that God can turn your trials into triumphs, okay? So I hope this video was helpful for you. 20 minutes giving you a how-to video on how to do a Bible study for 2 Corinthians using the Warren Wiersbe Bible Study Guide. If you found this video helpful, I encourage you to subscribe. If you want to get copies of these books, I have a link below to my Amazon, and you can click on those links. They're affiliate codes, so I do get a small commission if you buy anything, and you can buy these guides and use them in your small group. If you found this video helpful and want to subscribe and get updates on future videos, you can subscribe up there. If you want to find other Warren Wiersbe how-to guides, I got some videos up there on how to do other studies of the Bible with the Wiersbe guides. If you want to have some small group facilitator tips, I got some of those videos down there, as well as some topical studies you can learn to use in your small group down there. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you again in another video.